Hey everybody, I'm Tami Kiekhaefer. I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
And my name is Desiree Grimaldi. Welcome to Unguarded Minds podcast, where we talk about all the drama, trauma, and gritty things that life throws at you. Today we have a special guest, Chris Shelton. He is a former Scientologist and Sea Org member and is now a writer, consultant, podcaster, YouTuber, and advocate for critical thinking. Born and raised in California, Chris grew up in and became an active part of the Church of Scientology at a young age. He started working for the group at 17 years old and continued for 25 years, experiencing a great deal of physical and psychological abuse in the process. Chris left the Sea Org in late 2012 and escaped the Scientology mindset. Within a year after his escape, he has been working on educating the public about the dangers and destructive cults ever since, while he has been recovering from his own experiences and transitioning back into normal life. And your bio is much longer, but I really just want to dig in and it's
I should have given you the shorter version. I'm sorry that it's so the extended mix here with all these titles and everything. I'm just making my way in the world trying to inform people about cults. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and I just know we're going to cover all the topics and discuss them. So let's dive in.
Where would you like to start?
So I guess, could you describe like the environment of growing up in second generation Scientology, and then like how it shaped your beliefs and what happened to make you make the decision as a teenager to join on your own?
Yeah, great question. So my parents got involved with Scientology when I was about 3. They were divorced and they got back together because of the Scientology influence. So they shouldn't have, though. See, that's the hidden little secret in the thing, right? It's like you think, oh, they got back together. Yeah, that they weren't really compatible in the first place. And so they had me and they had reasons to be together and stuff. And Scientology sort of resolved some communication issues they had. So I grew up, the reason that's important is because I grew up crediting Scientology for saving my family. It was an important aspect in my life as a kid. That was the weight that it had to me, right? Because that's what my parents told me. And then, of course, my mom and dad would use Scientology practices on me growing up. And so I would have experiences that were a little out of the norm as far as having certain Scientology principles part of my thinking of how life works, and certain procedures and techniques, or I don't want to use the word rituals, because Scientology is really only a faux religion. They're really only a religion in name only. It's not like a church when you think about going down to the mosque or the temple or something. It's not, Scientology isn't like that experience. It's when you go down to a Church of Scientology, you do classes and you do individual one-on-one, what they call counseling. I wouldn't call it counseling anymore, but it's called auditing. And that's a sort of one-on-one therapeutic approach. And so those two things are important for me to mention at the beginning, because that was my experience of our religion. Is my mom and my dad and I would go down to the church and take classes. Or do this counseling work, and it's a pretty involved, formalized procedure. It's not this sort of praying and having a deity and stuff like that. There was none of that. It was all about self-improvement, and it was about ego boosting and how we were better than everybody else, and how we knew things that other people didn't know. And this sacred knowledge was really important. It really stood us up above other people. And so I kind of grew up with this attitude of we're kind of secretly better than everybody else. And when you're a kid, that's just kind of when you're sort of fed that, you go, okay, well that's good. I went to public schools. I had a public school education. My folks had regular jobs. They weren't billion-year contract fanatics. They were that was what I did later. They were just working in this was in California, and so I kind of grew up with these ideas about the mind and the spirit and the relationship of these things. And Scientology again has really specific ideas about this stuff. So when I hit high school is when I first started getting any kind of resistance to this. This was in the mid 80s, right? I graduated in 87. And
Mm-hmm.
and so there was some pushback, but there was no internet. There was no real broad understanding of what it was I was involved in. So people didn't really get it, and I didn't really want to get into arguments with them in high school about it. There was enough drama there otherwise. So so I just kind of ignored all of that and was able to kind of compartmentalize it and not let it disrupt my beliefs. And then when I was 15 years old, a sophomore in high school, is when I really officially started going down to the church and doing the classwork for myself on my own bat, right? I went down there and my dad said, look, why don't you just go down there and find out for yourself what it's all about, like for real, right? So I did their personality test and they nailed me. And they got me right between the eyes, right? Because I was this 15-year-old shy, geeky, bookwormy kind of guy who couldn't get a date, couldn't connect with women in any way in high school. I was just horrible at it. And I was shy, I was introverted, I couldn't get dates, right? And I thought this was this really, big secret. I look back now and it was, all you had to do was look at me and you could see this, but I didn't get that this was so obvious, right? I didn't really have the experience of the world. And so they sit me down and do this personality test and they give you this graph and it's got all your personality traits kind of graphed out. How happy or sad you are or how in communication or withdrawn you are. There's these extremes that they're graphing your personality characteristics. And she looks at my graph and she looks at me and she goes, oh, well, you look like you're you look like you're kind of shy and maybe have a hard time talking to people in your school, and maybe that's kind of a problem for you in your life. And I almost fell out of my chair because nobody was talking to me like this.
Yeah.
And here's somebody who sounded like they really cared and they really were interested in me as an individual. Nobody else was. So so here's this person telling me that not only, and they're nailing me, and I'm like, I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, how did you know? And and then she goes, well, listen, not only do I know that about you from this test, but we have a class you can take which will solve that problem and you won't have any problem with women anymore. And I was like, what? Sign me,
Sign
shut up
me
and take
up.
my money, right? I couldn't sign up fast enough. So so that's how it all began, really. And I was primed for that conversation by all those years of growing up in it. I didn't walk into the church doubtful, cynical, critically thinking about it. I was very, very prepared to believe everything they told me. And it wasn't hard because they were really good at nailing my personality quirks at the time, right? So so that's kind of how it all started and how I got really involved with it, as far as actually paying for stuff and doing services with the church.
So they had your personality type, so they knew exactly how to manipulate and play the.
Yeah,
When you're a
they just
15-year-old
love
boy,
bombing,
like, yeah, what 15-year-old boy, what middle schooler does know how to connect and talk and feel socially and physically comfortable in their skin? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I had always felt out of place. And I know that's common for teenagers. I'm not saying I was something special that way. But one thing that was different about me, like for real, was that I had started school a year earlier than everybody else because I was born in December. That's a thing. And my mom didn't realize it when she put me in school early. I didn't realize that was a difference. I didn't know that was a thing that set me apart from other people. All I knew going through school was that I was smaller than everybody else. I was runtier than everybody else. And it was very, very easy, therefore, to bully me. And I would get picked on a lot by bigger kids. And everybody was bigger than me. And it was really it was obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me. Like, I didn't get it. I thought I was supposed to be on par with everybody else, but I wasn't. And that always put me mentally and physically a little bit behind everybody else. And I always felt less than other people because of that. So it was a lifeline to me to have a belief set that my parents endorsed that put me above everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
in my own mind, right? And I was not aware of any of this, really. I would not have been able to explain it this way when I was growing up, but this was, looking back at it, this was, I think, the situation.
Wow.
So then how long were you involved in the church? Like so 15, it was like hook, line, and sinker. I'm in, you get me, I feel validated. Thank you so much. And then where did it go from there?
Okay, well then it was 27 years of involvement. I went all in. And I was encouraged in this by the fact that I'd grown up with it. It wasn't a strange, weird thing to me. This was reality. And there's a lot of terminology, and I'm not going to try to not throw that around here because it would just be weird. But there's a lot of loaded language in Scientology. There's a lot of specialized words and definitions and concepts that put you into that Scientology worldview. Like about the mind, they have this whole anatomy of the mind laid out, that there's a reactive mind and an analytical mind, and your reactive mind is kind of this Freudian id kind of thing, except it's different. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I thought I had this leg up on the rest of the world. So it was easy to be recruited into this world. I was kind of already there. So when I graduated high school, I was 17 years old. I started going to community college because I wanted to be a writer, but the church had other ideas. And this was in Santa Barbara, California, where we had moved up to when I went to high school. So I was going down to the church pretty regularly, and they started recruiting me to work there. They went, hey, you'd be a great staff member. You should join up here. You should be part of what we're doing. You could be an amazing person. You could save the world. You could make such a difference here. Again, more love bombing, right? And I, again, was 17. I hadn't had a girlfriend yet, by the way. Even though I did these classes, it didn't change anything, right?
Didn't work.
But somehow you were able to just kind of put that in the back seat and go, well, look at all these things that made me feel really good. So obviously this works, right? Even though I couldn't get dates or anything, they really weren't fulfilling their promises, but I thought they were. I kind of had this weird idea they were. So when I was 17, right out of high school, they start really going in hard. They're sitting with me for hours. They're talking to me. They're showing me Hubbard writings and quotes that encourage more participation in the activity. The fact that Scientology is the only thing that is actually making a difference in the world. And I mean the only thing. Everything else was painted with a very broad brush of they're deluded, they're walking around in a hypnotized state. The outside world has no idea how screwed up they are.
Wow.
We are the ones who have the knowledge and the secrets and the way to have a happy life. And we have the knowledge, and this is the recruitment point. We have the technology. This is the word they use. We have the technology to change conditions in the world permanently, to make everything better, to solve criminality, to end war, to end illiteracy, like on a broad scale. We have the way, we know what to do. We just don't have enough people involved to do it. We need more people. And if we could just get them, we could turn the tide of this entire planet and change how crazy it is. And wouldn't that be nice? And having just come out of high school, I thought the world was a pretty crazy place. So I was like, yeah, let's do this. And especially because they put you in the driver's seat. You're the one who's going to make this change. So sure, you can go write books. You can be the next Stephen King. But is he really changing the world? No. He's just making everybody feel worse. Why don't you join up and be part of something that's actually really making a difference, right?
Wow.
And this was an intensely you know, like I said, nobody was talking to me like this. This was like, wow. You know, I even went down and talked to the military recruiters. They didn't talk to you like this. They talked to you about the GI Bill and how you could make some money and how you could, you know, get yourself through college and stuff if you join the military and give them 4 years. And I thought, well, that's an option. But this was a whole different level. And I fell for it. I am a pretty empathetic, want to make a difference, want the world to be a better place. I'm kind of that guy. And so it was real easy to get me on board with that. And surprisingly, my parents weren't on board. They didn't want me joining staff. They wanted me doing Scientology, but they didn't want me working for the church. And that was actually a little bit of a point of conflict, but all that did was kind of push all my teen rebellion buttons. And it's like, oh, my parents don't want me to do this? Well, I'm definitely doing it then. So those things all came together and I ended up joining staff. I worked for the church in Santa Barbara for 8 years. They sign you up as a religious volunteer, so you're not paid. I had to have other jobs in order to make a living, put a roof over my head, and support myself. And I had to learn how to do all that because I was, you know, fresh off the boat, so to speak. My parents really subsidized my existence for the first couple of years until they were finally like, look, we can't keep paying your rent and stuff. You got to get a job and make something of yourself. So I was trying to dedicate my time to the church, and I was doing 40 to 50 hours a week there. And then I was doing a 40-hour-a-week job.
Wow.
So all I was doing was working, right? I only had nights and weekends off. And I did that for 8 straight years in Santa Barbara. And it became clear to me over those years that we were not saving the world. We were not making that difference. We were not impacting even Santa Barbara, much less the world. And I thought something has to change.
Now, did you question them at any time? Like, wait a second, the world's not changing, the criminality, the literacy. And what would happen if you questioned it?
In my mind, the equation was we aren't working hard enough.
Oh, it's your fault.
That's right. And this was heavily encouraged by all of Hubbard's writings. He's crystal clear in his writings to the staff. And there are many, many writings. There's thousands of pages of policies and bulletins on how to run Scientology churches. It's not a loosey-goosey thing. They're very organized. And that organization is all built around Hubbard's ideas of how to run an organization. And his ideas are really stupid. But I didn't know that at the time. I was wrapped up in everything Hubbard says is true. And if the world doesn't agree with that, it's the world that's wrong, not Hubbard. We need to comply with what he's telling us to do. He's the genius. He's the genius philosopher who mapped out our spiritual freedom. Wow. So I need to listen to this guy. This is somebody important. And so if he says that if you do A, you will get result B, then that's what's supposed to happen. And if we're not getting that result, we're not correctly doing the procedure or the process or the method. That it's on us. We're screwing it up. And we were all very convinced of that truth. And when you look at the world through that lens, then there's this sort of rock solid certainty that it's never L. Ron Hubbard that's at fault. And it's never the church that's at fault. It's us. So building on that kind of viewpoint, I felt that I wasn't doing enough, that Santa Barbara, the staff around me, we were just too small. We weren't making the impact. But look at what we could do if we were better organized. And I had people around me who were just as serious about this as I am, right? This kind of attitude.
Yeah.
And so what that did, it was just such the wrong calculation. I decided to join the C organization. And that is SEA, the C organization, as in it's a smaller group of fanatical believers within the Church of Scientology who dedicate themselves full-time 24/7. All they do is Scientology. They don't have a house, they don't have a car, they don't have a life. They join this elite group. And it's a paramilitary outfit. They have uniforms, they model themselves after the Navy, they have ranks and ratings and yes sir, no sir, how high sir. That's how they, there's a whole internal rank system. And I joined that. I thought, well, this is a disciplined outfit of Hubbard's most devoted followers. I am devoted. These are the people who are going to make the difference in the world. And I want to be part of that. So I doubled down, basically, right? And instead of continuing, and instead of leaving staff and going off and getting a real job and making a life for myself, I doubled down and moved to Los Angeles and started working at those big blue buildings in Hollywood that you might have seen photos of with the big Scientology sign across the top of it. That building is where I lived for 17 years.
Wow. And
I did another 17-year stint in the Sea Org. And that's the group that has the billion-year contract. If you've ever heard about signing this billion-year contract of commitment, that's the Sea Org. It's obviously not a legally binding contract, right? But it's a symbolic commitment. And I was dedicating my entire life now to this cause. That was what was going through my mind, right? I didn't want to move down to LA. I didn't like it in LA. I didn't want to even necessarily work all the time, but I figured this was what I had to do. These were the sacrifices I had to make in order to accomplish our goals. Because I thought the world needed to be helped. I thought war needs to end, this kind of stuff. And so I went all in, and I spent another 17 years there.
Were your parents supportive? Like, now you're in the C group.
Yeah, not so much. They didn't enjoy that so much. My mom tried to discourage me, but here's the thing. By this point, this was 1995 that I joined the Sea Org. By that point, my folks had actually gotten out.
Oh.
They were no longer really doing Scientology anymore. They weren't particularly letting me know, because one of the things about Scientology is that it is a cult. And kind of the thing about it, right? And when you're in a cult, you don't take nicely to people talking trash about your cult, even your family. And my family were smart enough to not talk trash to me about it, because they knew that if they said too much about what they really thought, that I would end up cutting them off, shunning them, disconnecting from them. So my mom maintained a very nice, pleasant relationship with me. My dad did too. They had gotten divorced again right after I left home, and they got remarried, right? And they both got out of the church. And so I kind of knew they weren't really with it anymore, but I really wasn't in touch with them maybe once or twice a year. I wasn't seeing them. They were living in Northern California. I was down in LA. I never had any time off. I mean, when I went to the Sea Org, just to paint the picture a little bit, it's 24/7. Like and it's 7 days a week. There's no days off. There's no like time off. There's no vacations. There's no paid leave. It's $50 a week. They feed you. They clothe you. They birth you. They give you a room, right, to live in. And that's it.
Wow.
That's all you get.
How many people were part of it, do you think, in 1995?
Probably about 5,000 or 6,000 people in the Sea Org.
Because I Googled it, and they said that it's up to like 75,000 right now.
75,000. Well, the Sea Org is actually down to about 4,000 people total. Scientology
as 7,500. I'm sorry, it's at 7,500. It says it morphed over the decades, and there's more than 7,500 people serving in the Sea Org right now.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. I was privy to membership numbers when I was in, and I got out 10 years ago, and at that time it was roughly 5,000 Sea Org members, and we're guesstimating, there are guesstimates here, but there's probably something on the order of about 35 to 40,000 Scientologists worldwide. Period. That's like total numbers.
So maybe that's just their selling point. It's like, oh, 7,500 people aren't crazy.
Yeah, no, they're.
Do you feel like it, like, because we all hear about Scientology, and especially a lot in Hollywood right now, some of the actors and stuff that have come out. Do you feel like it was more of a West Coast thing? I know that there's a school for Scientology in Tampa, in Ybor. We've crossed paths. Me and my husband visit there a lot. But do you think it was more West Coast dominant?
No. Have you been to Clearwater?
Yeah,
Florida.
That's the only other place I've really seen.
I have.
Was in Florida.
Okay, they dominate the Clearwater skyline. That great big building and the Fort Harrison and everything. They also own about a third of the real estate in downtown Clearwater. Literally own it. No, it's not West Coast. It's Scientology's international in scope. Their largest installation actually is in Clearwater, Florida. It's called the Flag Service Org, or the Flag Land Base. It's a Sea Org outfit. There's a bunch of Sea Org members there. They're the second largest body of Scientologists is in Los Angeles, which is where I worked. There are churches up and down the California coast. They are also throughout the United States. There's Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, Kansas City, these kind of places. Denver here, there's a church here in Denver. But for example, there's absolutely no Scientology in Montana. There's no Scientology in Idaho. There's nothing going on in Ohio. So Cincinnati has a church, but there's very, very little going on. There's nothing in the Dakotas, right? But there is a Sea Org outfit in New York City. You have a base of operations in the United Kingdom at a place called St. Hill Manor in East Grinstead, sort of southern England. There's a Sea Org base in Copenhagen in Denmark, which is sort of the place that's sort of responsible for Scientology in Europe. And in Russia, by the way, there's a fairly interesting contingent of Scientologists in Russia. And there is a Sea Org base in Sydney, Australia, which manages Scientology's affairs out there. So you've got pockets of Scientologists in these various places, but it's a tiny outfit when you put it all together.
So I know we covered a lot, but what would you characterize like the internal workings of Scientology? So we covered that there's a lot of manipulation and things like that, but maybe you could clarify it a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Scientology's
the characteristics of it.
Yeah, no, totally. Scientology is a destructive cult, which means that they are a group of people who engage in high control behavior. They use emotional manipulation and thought manipulation to dominate people's thinking, like they did me growing up, where it's our way or the highway. This is the truth, and there is no other truth. And anybody who tells you otherwise is lying, or is ignorant, or they simply, don't know what they're talking about. L. Ron Hubbard figured out all the secrets of life. There are no secrets in any other group, institution, belief set, or organization that matter. We have all of it. And they do have a lot of stuff. I mean, there's thousands of pages of writings, about 30 books, thousands of lectures that Hubbard gave. I mean, there's such a mass of material there that it's imposing. You're like, wow, all this stuff by one man over 30 years. This guy put all this together, and it looks like an internally consistent, logically whole body of beliefs. It's not. It's as full of holes as Swiss cheese. It's horribly logically inconsistent. But you can make anything make sense. This is something I've come to learn since I got out, is anything can make sense to a person if they're motivated to believe it. And we, as I've described, I was very motivated. A lot of people in Scientology were very motivated to make it make sense.
Yeah.
And Hubbard's writings and organizational structure are put together to deal with any doubts or reservations you have. So that if they come up, if you start questioning what's going on, if you start thinking, maybe this isn't everything I thought it was, there are lots of procedures and things they'll do with you to handle that, right?
And pull you back in.
Yeah. Get you back in, right? So that's
what do you think the end well, I have a two-part question, but what do you think their end goal was? I'm assuming just control. But then where do you stand with, because of what you experienced, because every institution of any type of faith or religion ultimately says their truth is the only truth. But you could kind of identify a little bit more on what the end goals might be, whether it's financially. With Scientology, because they paid you little and it wasn't necessarily the same setup, was their ultimate goal just control?
Yeah. It depends on what level you want to talk about it at, actually, as far as ultimate goals, because it goes to some pretty weird places if you go all the way down the rabbit hole. Hubbard had some pretty bizarre occult beliefs that actually underpin what all of Scientology really is about. But that's kind of hard to explain. So let's just say Hubbard had some pretty bizarre beliefs in occult practices. But Scientology is ultimately easily summarized as a money-making scam that fakes itself as a religion in order to get tax exemption and in order to get First Amendment protections so that it can use methods of high control to solicit as much money and resources out of people as it can get from them before it spits them out. Ultimately, Scientology is a revolving door situation where people come in, they spend a little or an awful lot of time involved with it. Sometimes they spend the rest of their life in it, and they get their family involved. But more often than not, they spend a few years, maybe a decade or something, kind of suddenly realize what's going on and get themselves out. That's the more common experience of people in getting into Scientology. But because it, sort of pretends to be something that is altruistic and humanitarian and is about human rights and making a positive difference in the world, people can really get hooked up and fooled for a very long time about what it really is all about. At the end of the day, it's a money-making scam designed to enrich one person, the guy at the top. At first, that was L. Ron Hubbard. He died in 1986, and the man who took over is named David Miscavige, and he has been running the outfit as a dictator ever since. That's the truth of the situation. It is, and that really is, at the end of the day, the really sad truth about it is it's really just about making money. That's my summary of it.
So you left in 2012, is that right? Yep. Was it an abrupt change? Was it something that was kind of a longer process? Like, what was that moment for you when you were just like, this isn't what I thought?
Yeah, it was a long process for me. We have found, and I have found, other people have found that, the second generation experience of a cult, whether it's Scientology or Two Tribes or Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever, the second generation experience can make it a lot harder to get yourself out of it than if you're a first gen. You got yourself into it and you just change your mind, right? When you're raised with it, it's a very different thing because all of your early developmental stages and all of your early belief establishment systems, all of that is fully in concrete in this belief system. And so it took me 10 years of red flag after red flag after red flag to finally wake up. That's That's how I figured it out in looking back at it. There were moral outrages, there were, you know, betrayals, there was backstabbing, there was stuff that happened that you go, wow, that was really bad. But it wasn't enough to turn me away from the whole thing. It was just enough to make me upset about it and not happy with it. But I still felt I was dedicated to a cause that was bigger than me. And I was all about causes that were bigger than me. You know, we would analogize our experience in Scientology to the Matrix, you know, or to like Star Wars, and we were the Jedi Knights, you know, we were the ones making the difference in the universe, right? Oh, and I think I need to put here into this question, into this answer, that at a very, very important part of Scientology, like foundational to its whole system of belief, is that you have lived before and you will live again. This body you have right now is one of millions of lifetimes you have lived. You are not your body. Your body is something that has as much to do with who you are as your shirt does. It just isn't you. You are an immortal spiritual being who has lived countless numbers of lives on this planet and thousands of others. And you've been kicking around in this physical universe for billions, trillions of years. Not that the Scientology doesn't agree with science that the universe is, you know, whatever, 6.7 billion years or whatever the figure is, right? They think it's way older. And we've been here for a lot longer. And all of us collectively as spirits, the word in Scientology is a thetan. It's not a ghost or a spirit or a soul. The word is thetan from the Greek letter theta. So you're a thetan, I'm a thetan, everybody's as an individual thetan. We're not all part of some collective spiritual entity. We're all individual life units. And we're all making our way through this universe. And that's important to understand, because I didn't think of my experience in Scientology as a one lifetime thing. I didn't think about the consequences of leaving Scientology as, well, it's just a group I'm going to leave behind and I'll go do something else. There wasn't something else to go do that had anywhere near the importance or significance of what Scientology is about. And I was a true believer. I didn't think this was a con. I didn't think this was something that was, you know, that was making money. I thought we were literally saving the entire universe. and Scientology openly calls this planet and the civilizations on it and the history of it, they call it a prison planet. We're all stuck here. We can't get out. It's kind of like the Buddhist thing. You're stuck in this wheel and you can't get off. And so Scientology is the only thing that offers you a path out of that prison. So it wasn't just a matter for me of leaving Scientology behind and, okay, I'll go do something else. It was, if I left, I was dooming myself to an eternity of pain and suffering.
So then
just like I've been having for millennia in my past. My future was going to look the same.
So then there's a huge fear of leaving.
Yeah, gigantic.
So I can't leave. I want to, but I can't. And then with the love bombing and the gaslighting, your confidence kind of tanks and that dependency gets created, and
you got it.
Like an abusive relationship.
Exactly like that. Incredibly codependent. So I just wanted to kind of put that there so that the magnitude of the decision of leaving Scientology was kind of clearer, right? It wasn't just, I don't like these people, I want to go meet some other people. It was, I literally thought I was walking out of it and into the gates of hell. You know, it was like that kind of a, okay, here we go, right? That was that kind of a thinking. So that's why it took 10 years to build up the resolve to realize something ain't right here. You know, it was a gradual erosion of that belief system to seeing, you know, people abusing one another and justifying it because of the mission, because of what we were doing. You know, okay, fine, there's going to be some casualties along the way, but look at what we're doing. We're saving the universe, right? Like this is important. If some people can't cut it, or if some people have a hard time with that, or if some people, you know, fall by the wayside or need to be slapped around a little bit to see sense, well, okay, then that's what has to happen, right? You gotta build, you know, make that omelet, right? Gonna break some eggs. So that was how I was able to kind of rationalize the physical abuse and the psychological abuse that was going on around me all the time.
Wow.
I mean, there was a period of time where I didn't sleep for a week because of all the work we were doing, right? We were like, got to get this job done. There was this special project we were working on, and you just didn't have time to sleep. You know, it's like, well, got to get this target met, you know, and it has to get done by this date, and you got to work until it's done. You know, it was that kind of attitude. People shouldn't be keeping themselves up for a week. It's not good for you.
Yeah.
I can
I
tell
was
you from
gonna
personal
say
experience.
that's also by design, you know, probably. I mean, you know what it's like when you're not sleeping. You're a little cuckoo in the head.
Loopy. Yeah, you get loopy. And sleep deprivation was the order of the day in the Sea Org. You could be woken up at 3 a.m, you know, here they are knocking on your door, let's go, right? Some emergency, some flappy situation. That's what they would call it, it was a flap.
Let's not call it a form of torture. Let's call it flappy.
That's right. It was a flap, right? We got to handle this flap. So any time of any day, you could be summoned or have to go deal with some problem or issue or situation. And you could be sent out to, you know, Keokuk to deal with some situation out there. You know, the last few years I was in the Sea Org, I was roaming around the Western United States doing projects and logistics work and stuff like that. So it wasn't all just in Los Angeles. There, you know, you could go around to the different churches and do stuff. The Sea Org is kind of the outfit that manages Scientology internationally. It's not just another service organization. They're the ones who do the commercials and do the promotional pieces and manage the churches and do all the legal work, and all of that stuff gets done by the Sea Org. So I had various jobs there, managing churches and making books. They have a book making facility. I worked there for a little while. That was the Sea Org. Stuff like that. So in having all these different experiences and stuff, getting back to your finally answering your question, it took a long time for me to start seeing that there were really significant lies being told to us over and over and over again. And it was really because of my experience traveling around, which not every Sea Org member gets to do, that I got to see boots on the ground what the state of the various churches was. And they're all empty. Like, there's not a lot of people doing Scientology. But you wouldn't know that if you listened to the Scientologists, you know? And especially the leader, right? Because we would have these yearly events, these get-togethers, and they would happen 8 times a year, where he would come out on a stage and present all these numbers and statistics and success stories and testimonials. And these were very, very highly produced events, graphics and shiny things and all kinds of stuff, and new releases of repackaged Hubbard works and stuff everybody could get all excited about. So there's a lot of internal work done to keep Scientologists satisfied and happy that they are Scientologists, and keeping them in the frame of mind that they are making a significant difference in the world. The reality of Scientology is not what they think Scientology is. They have a whole different idea about how Scientology is growing, and governments love Scientology, and we're making all these inroads, and look at all this impact. We're bringing peace and prosperity to Ukraine or to the Middle East or here or there by passing out Hubbard books and stuff. we would get these briefings and we would believe them because we wanted to believe them so badly because we wanted it to be true. And traveling around, I started seeing the reality that it wasn't true and that we were just making money off of these people, but we weren't really doing anything impactful. And everybody was kind of like Santa Barbara. I thought Santa Barbara was the outlier. I thought we were the guys who were failing and everybody else was succeeding.
Oh.
Because if you listen to David Miscavige, that's the picture that he paints is we're winning here and we're winning there and look at all this success we're having. But I started seeing for myself that wasn't true. And there was a change, you could say, over the years that I was involved, because I was involved for decades, where the emphasis on money became more obvious, became more open. It became, pretty blatant, really, in some ways. And that discouraged me. I wasn't there for the money. Obviously, I was making $50 a week. We weren't seeing all this money. The money was going to the top. So for me, it was just drudgery. I was just working my ass off all the time. For what? For what return? And it was finally in 2012, I was 42 years old. I'd been working since I was 17.
Wow.
And it was the same picture. And I was in the same place. And I'm like, it's been decades now. I think something's wrong here, and I don't think it's me. And that was kind of what finally started waking me up to it. And the final nail in the coffin, is what I've said for years, is there was an epiphany moment. There was a moment that I had where I was preparing for my day. I was out in Twin Cities and Minnesota on a project out there at the church. And I was putting my to-do list together for the day, and it just hit me. It just hit me out of nowhere. It just struck me. You know how you have those kind of like, hey, wait a minute kind of thoughts? Is I was writing down my to-do list and I went, wait a minute. I have to straight up lie to people to get these things done. To get this person back in the church, to make this money off of this person, to recruit this person. Every one of these tasks that I'm giving, that I'm required to do, requires that I deceive people in order to successfully pull it off. Because if I tell them the truth, they won't do it. They won't join staff, or they won't sign up for a service, or they won't pay for a book or something, right? I have to deceive them. Like, for example, if I'm going to recruit somebody to work for the church, I have to tell them, well, you're going to have days off and you're going to get paid and it's going to be great. And you're going to, and we're going to expand Scientology here. Well, I've been doing this for 27 years. I knew none of that stuff was true. You're not going to get days off. You're not going to get paid. And we're not making the difference that we all tell ourselves we're making. And that part was pretty clear to me after all those years. So I realized, oh my God, I'm straight up lying to people. And I'm doing it all the time. And once that curtain is open, you can't close it, right? You can't unsee that.
Right.
And I couldn't walk that back. And I'm not a dishonest person, and I don't want to lie to people. So I couldn't make it make sense anymore. And that was the turning point. That was when it all changed.
Did you just not go back? Like, was there backlash?
No.
Like,
how'd you get through all the layers?
like a gang? Did you have to get beat out? I mean,
no. What ended up happening is I ended up doing what's called all the terminology of Scientology. Basically, I went back to LA and I said, look, I was on this special project out there, and it was going to take me like a year or something to get the project done. I was working with some other Sea Org members out there. We were sent out there to do this special project out in Twin Cities. And I kind of wasn't really with it. But it wasn't obvious. I wasn't making myself into a spectacle or trying to be a wave rocker or something like that. I was just trying to make my way. But I realized I didn't really want to be part of this anymore. But even then, I felt like a responsibility to the people in Twin Cities, the Scientologists there, to finish what I'd started. I had integrity, and I wanted to fulfill my word. So I tried to keep going on the project I was on, but it didn't really work out. My heart wasn't really in it, and it kind of, and then there were some red flags because I started thinking about what my life would be like outside of the Sea Org and what I was going to do and what kind of support network was I going to have, because I was terrified. I had no job skills, no resume, no nothing. Like, what was I going to do, right? At least that was the viewpoint that I had at the time. Mm-hmm. I'd been working for Scientology for 27 years. I had enough real world experience to know that people want resumes and they want job experience and they want, an explanation of what you've been doing all these years. Yeah. And this was not going to be a good explanation. Right? So I didn't know. I had a very uncertain future, and I was very, very worried about that. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know anybody outside the Sea Org anymore. I mean, it's not like when you're in the Sea Org, you have friends outside. You're not on social media. There's no Facebook. There's no internet access. You don't have that freedom. So Scientology is a very controlling outfit, and I haven't even really laid out the half of it as far as the controls go. Yeah. But that put me in a very vulnerable position. And this is one of the reasons people stay in the Sea Org, is because they know what other options do I have? Mm-hmm. And people die in the Sea Org because of that. So I spoke with my parents independently, and they both indicated in very careful language, because they knew I could change my mind, and then they could lose the relationship. Even then, if, all the way up to me being 42 years old. But they indicated that they would be there for me if I needed it. And that was all I needed to hear. I was like, okay, good. I'm going to have some backup. I'm going to have something to fall back on. I'm going to have some help outside, right? Because what the Sea Org tells you is if you leave, you're going to end up flipping burgers at McDonald's. You're useless. You're going to fail miserably. And they even tried to tell me that when I was leaving, right? But I kept to my guns, and I said, no, it's time for me to go. I went back to LA, and I said, look, and here was the crazy part. I just didn't want to work for Scientology anymore. At that point in time, I still believed in the philosophy of it. I hadn't yet realized what a liar L. Ron Hubbard really was. I didn't know anything about his real backstory or his real life or his 3 wives or the cheating or the abuse or any of it. I didn't know about so much stuff. So I still believed that the belief system of Scientology was true. I just saw the abuses in the Sea Org, and I thought organizationally they're out to lunch. But philosophically, they're still nailing it, and this is still the way to save the world. I just don't want to be part of that abusive environment anymore. I don't want to lie to people. I don't want to get beaten up anymore. I don't want people hitting me. I don't want the sleep deprivation. I want to eat food. My life had gotten to a place where the ultimate experience of pleasure in a life would be to have a steak dinner. Wow. That was the pinnacle of experience for me as a Sea Org member. Was I would fantasize about having a steak dinner.
Wow.
Like, that was peak experience for me as an individual, because that was as much as I could aspire to having or experiencing as a Sea Org member. Yeah. It was a monastic, sequestered, cut off life. And I didn't want that life anymore. And I saw Scientologists who were successful, who had houses, who had kids, who had jobs, who were doing Scientology and making something of their life and appeared to be happy doing it. That was what I wanted.
Yeah, because you're in your 40s, you don't have a relationship. I mean,
Yeah,
kids,
at this
nothing.
point, I
You're
was
just
married to another Sea Org member, but the marriage had fallen apart at this point, and I was kind of stuck in it. And in fact, that was another one of the linchpins of getting me out. Was my marriage fell apart, and I had been devoted to my wife and stayed in the Sea Org partly for her. So once that collapsed, that was no longer a reason for me to stay either. So when I left in 2012, I had to cooperate with the church. I couldn't just leave in the middle of the night. I could easily have done that, but I didn't want to because I wanted to stay a Scientologist in good standing. And leaving the Sea Org is not an easy thing to do. They don't just let you, oh, you don't want to be here anymore? Okay, there's the door. Bye-bye. That's not how it goes. They want to keep you. They want to retain you. And so they do this very long, involved process of guilt and shame and blame and emotional manipulation and a lot of gaslighting to get you to stay. And I knew that was coming because I had participated in that kind of behavior myself and getting other people to stay over the years, thinking we were doing the good work. I mean, I didn't think about this as gaslighting and emotional abuse. I thought we were, fighting the fight. Thought we were on a crusade,
Right.
How dare you leave? What are you talking about? You're betraying us. Don't go, right? It was this kind of attitude.
We're Jedis. Where are you going?
Yeah. How could you leave the order? How could you go back into the Matrix? What's wrong with you, right? So it was that kind of attitude, and that's how people talked to me when I wanted to leave. But I stuck to my guns, and I was like, no, I got to get out of here. And I did that, and I successfully did that. It took me 9 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a 9-month process to do that. But by the end of 2012, December 2012, I got out. They let me go. And I went up and lived with my mom. She gave me a place to stay for a month. And she was going to give me 3 months. And I was going to get a job and get a place. And we had a little plan. And she was very, very supportive. I could not have done this without my mom. Absolutely, positively true. So she bought me a car. She really helped me establish myself in the world, in the real world. But I was still completely in the crazy space of Scientology as far as the beliefs go. And I sent out resumes trying to get jobs with all my Scientology experience on it. Not one person ever called me back. I had no idea at that point in time, or this is early 2013. I had no idea what the world knew about Scientology at this point, because I'd been censored from all of that. That we didn't have internet access in the Sea Org. I didn't have the ability to just go look at anything about Scientology. Not to mention that we thought police ourselves as cult members. We didn't. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear any of that negativity about L. Ron Hubbard. Well, after I got out of the Sea Org, I was a little bit more open to hearing some of that negativity.
Yeah.
Because I had seen the abusive side of Scientology. I knew that was real. I had been abused, and I had abused others, and I had seen it from every angle. Thankfully, I never committed any crimes in Scientology. Some people did, right? There was credit card fraud and financial shenanigans and physical abuse of people that would definitely be criminal activity. And thankfully, I didn't go there with that stuff. But I had my share of tormenting people and abusing people verbally and stuff like that. I definitely did. And I didn't want to be that person or have that brought out in me. I'd always thought of that as the worst version of myself. Some people revel in it. I wasn't one of those people, and most people aren't. So but I knew that there were problems. And so when I would see little bits and pieces on the internet about some of those problems, and I saw articles and videos and news stories from people that I knew who had left before I did. I went, oh, that's what happened to Joe Schmo, right? And there he is talking about, oh, that happened to him? Oh my God, right? Like I didn't know, because it's not like we talk about this in the Sea Org. You don't talk about any of that crap in the Sea
Mm-hmm.
Org. You don't talk about the negative publicity or the articles about Tom Cruise acting crazy on Oprah's couch. I never saw South Park. I didn't know about Xenu. None of that stuff. I was a little naive child when it came to the truth of Scientology. So slowly I started getting access to this stuff and being willing to look at it. And it took me about 3 months of going down what I call the internet rabbit hole, right, of Scientology. And it started small, and then you find out one thing and it connects to another and it connects to another. And there's an awful lot of bullshit out there about it too. Don't get me wrong. Some of the stuff people say about it is just totally wrong. But I was hearing things that absolutely lined up with my experiences, and I knew it was true. And there were specific personalities and individuals who had done certain things that, people were now writing about. There was a whole spread in the Tampa Bay Times in the around 2010 called the Truth Rundown, which was this whole expose on Scientology. It nailed it. And I read that and I went, yeah, I can't disagree with any of this. This is all true. And it's all testimonial from people who were there. People talking about David Miscavige beating on them. And I went, yeah, I could see that.
Wow.
That kind of stuff. Because David Miscavige is an intense little man. And the idea that he had beaten up on a bunch of people was, at first kind of hard for me to believe. But then I saw who they were, what they were saying, how they were describing it. And I went, nope, that all makes total sense.
Wow.
So after seeing that, I then started seeing the truth about Hubbard himself. See, at first, the way it usually goes when people leave Scientology is they get critical about, or they're willing to see problems with the organization, just like I had. There's something fishy going on here, but it's the organization. It's not the subject. It's these guys messing it up. And almost universally, what people will first hit on is not that L. Ron Hubbard's a bad guy. It's David Miscavige who's twisting and corrupting everything. Hubbard's the good guy, and Miscavige is just making it all bad.
Wow.
Well, yeah, as you keep going down the rabbit hole, you start seeing, no, it was L. Ron Hubbard. It all started with L. Ron Hubbard. Everything David Miscavige is doing, he's doing because L. Ron Hubbard wrote it down. Do it this way. Ruin these people. Hurt these people. Annihilate these people. Even kill these people. Like, there's some nasty, nasty stuff that L. Ron Hubbard has written that none of us were privy to. A lot of confidential issues and writings that I didn't even know existed. Because we weren't given access to it. It was for a very select number of people. And Scientology's really good at siloing information. All cults are, really. That's one of the superpowers of cult leaders, is they're really good at compartmentalizing who knows what. And they're the only one who has the big picture.
That's the power.
Yeah, that's the power. That's right. So basically, once all these secrets started becoming exposed and I started seeing all the confidential stuff, and I watched South Park, and I learned about Xenu, and I learned about all the secret writings that I did not know about when I was in, all the high level stuff that's ultra super confidential. Yeah, I read all that stuff. It's all on the internet. Wow. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was furious. I was so mad. I was so mad.
That's time you can't get back.
Oh, I was so I just couldn't believe that 27 years of my life thinking I was a Jedi, thinking I was all that. Thinking we were all that. Thinking this group was saving the world, only to find out it was all for money and abuse and sadism, really. I mean, like really sick stuff, beating up on people and torturing people and really hurting people. That's what L. Ron Hubbard and David Miscavige are really about. And there's just such the shiny picture painted for you that hides all of that. And I'd been a fool, and it's not a pleasant realization to see that, to realize that you've been a pawn on a chessboard and you've been being pushed around your whole life. And there just aren't words for it. Even 10 years later, I just don't have words for it. All I can say is I was really, really, really mad. So that was kind of the breaking point for where I really got out of Scientology entirely as a belief system. It was no longer valid for me in any way.
Yeah.
And ever since then, it's been 10 years of undoing all the mental mind, sort of, what do they call those? The booby traps, the little mental mines that they've laid in your thinking. There's a lot of them in Scientology. So it's been a real process undoing all that.
And then I think you turned it into trying to educate and validate people to say, no, you're not wrong. You can ask these questions. Second guess, don't second guess yourself. Second guess that. Then you kind of switched your, what did that look like?
Oh, that was great. Yeah, that's been my life for the last 10 years. It's been awesome. It's well, I think you guys can see I don't have a problem talking.
I know. I see you were featured on Scientology in the Aftermath.
I was. Yeah, I got to be on there. Oh, it was great. It was awesome.
Yeah.
I got to consult for it, and I got to be on it twice, and it was. Leah is awesome. Anyway, it was a really fun experience.
I just love hearing her voice.
Oh, Leah, by the way, Leah is exactly how she presents on camera, by the way. That is Leah. Yeah. That's exactly what she's like. She is ballsy and she tells it like it is. And she is, to this day, she's a friend of mine. She's awesome.
It must have been super helpful for you too, though, like being on shows like that and starting to advocate and starting to share your stories it makes you sad, but it also is very validating to hear, like, me too. Other people that went through it, that thought the same way as you did, that experienced very similar things. So it's almost like you had a whole community waiting for you to just cross back over to be able to support you.
That's right. That's very true. There is a community of ex-Scientologists out there who have a sort of community. Like any community, there's all kinds of ups and downs and personality conflicts and everything. But I've found that to be true across the ex-cult spectrum, right? The ex-JWs, ex-Mormons, all of them have these communities. And you can get online and join Facebook groups or message boards or meet with people and at workshops and conventions and get-togethers and stuff. And sometimes there's support groups specifically put together by ex-members for ex-members. There's a lot of support and help out in the real world for people who have left cults. And sometimes it's a little hard to find that. Sometimes it's easier. There are special nonprofits put together to help people out of cults and cult activities. Friends of mine and I have, not me. Anyway. I'm friends with people who are part of a group called the Aftermath Foundation, which is a group specifically set up to help people leave the Sea Org or leave Scientology financially, to kind of give some support and a little bit of a safety net for people when they come out, because they need that. I had my mom. If I hadn't had my mom, I could have ended up homeless. I mean, there's just no, and some people have. It can be really challenging for people to leave a totalist environment like the Sea Organization. And there were people in the 80s and 90s who grew up in that environment. They were born into the Sea Org. And that is not a child-friendly environment. Just to say the least. So anyway, as far as finding community and support, there's been a lot. And I decided to dedicate my time in life to helping people as best I could. First, it was about exposing Scientology's abuses, and I made a bunch of content, a bunch of videos and podcasts, and went on shows and went on other people's shows, and tried to do everything I could get the word out there, and get on other people's platforms who were trying to get the word out there about destructive cults, because Scientology is one of many. And after about 2 or 3 years of talking about and exposing Scientology stuff, there was this epiphanal moment. Again, there's been a lot of epiphanies along the way here. And there was this really important one day of realizing, wait a minute, all the stuff that goes on in Scientology, all the things Hubbard figured out and Hubbard does to people, they do that same stuff over in the JWs. That Jim Jones did the same thing L. Ron Hubbard does. David Koresh does the same things L. Ron Hubbard does. And you realize all these cult leaders have a playbook. You're like, wait a minute, they're all doing the same damn thing. They talk a certain way, they act a certain way, they instill certain beliefs in a certain way. There's certain buttons people have, and you can push them, and people, you know, sometimes respond in these very predictable ways. And that was a really important moment, because it took all the power away from L. Ron Hubbard. Because it was like, he's nobody special. He's just doing the same thing all these other guys have done. He's pretty crafty about it. I'll give him that. There's a lot of layers to Scientology, more than there are to most of these other groups, in fact. But at the end of the day, they're just predators. And they prey on people. And you can see how they do it. And you can actually break it down, same, right? And that's what drew me to critical thinking and psychology and coercive control as a subject, as something to know about. And I got to a couple of years ago, I got to go back to school. I got to go to university, and where I left community college to go be part of Scientology. Then I left Scientology, and now I got to go to university and actually get a degree and actually learn about psychology and learn about coercive control. And I got a degree in that. And that changed everything, because now I can talk really intelligently about it. And it's not just my experience or what I'm guessing about. I can really tell you about it and break it down for you. And that's what I've been trying to do for 10 years is break it down for people, and then help them to get past it, to move on, to recover from it, because there is a process you have to go through, and it's not the same for everybody. And I don't pretend to have a 12-step program. There's no such thing. Not for cult recovery. It's got to be individual for each person. You got to deal with the person in front of you. You know, you can't shoehorn everybody into step A, step B, step C. That's what the cults do. Yeah. Right? We can't do that. We got to work with the person in front of us, and I'm sure you guys understand that. So, so that's what I do now, and I try to consult with people and help them. And I've gotten the opportunity to do be involved in a couple of cult interventions, and really sit down with people in a cult, and and talk to them and stuff, and educate the family and help people kind of resolve that whole thing, because often there's family issues. Anyway, it's kind of a whole thing, but I get to do that work now, and it's not necessarily like super high paying work.
Well,
but it's very satisfying work to help people. So
rewarding.
Yeah, very rewarding.
Yeah. So do you work with, you said individuals and families, do you do group work also? Okay.
I have not. I know people who do. I'm going to actually go do a talk next month to a group out in Portland that has been putting kind of support group format together that they can export to communities, and you could follow this sort of format and have a successful sort of support group. I'm highly encouraging and trying to endorse that kind of behavior, that kind of activity, because I think we need that. There aren't enough therapists out there. There just aren't. Just numbers wise, there just aren't enough. Kind of like there aren't enough lawyers, and you just don't have enough of these resources for people. So we have to kind of, as ex-cult members, we have to sort of grab the reins and take control of our own recovery. And certainly getting therapeutic help is, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that's not necessary. I've had tons of therapy. It's very helpful. but it's not all that's there, and it's not necessarily the only thing you need. And sometimes finding the right therapist can be really challenging. It's not like every therapist out there understands coercive control or cults.
Right.
Very few of them do. So it's so it can be a challenge, and that's why I push education as a primary point of recovery. I think it helps enormously to understand this stuff.
And being able to talk to someone who's actually been through it, where you can say, oh, I know. Oh, yeah. And then did this happen to you? Because this happened to me. I mean, I think that's the thing that really stops people with these belief systems of, being able to put the stick in the cogwheel.
Well, because nobody wants to feel like they were duped, or they didn't see the writing on the wall.
That's right.
Just like nobody wants to be the first buyer. Like nobody wants to be the first. And
that's right. There's no way around it. If you want to recover from a cult, you're going to be eating some humble pie.
Yeah.
There's no way to avoid it. And if people want to avoid it, they're not going to recover. I don't mean to be so judgmental, but it's just a fact. You know what I mean? It's kind of like sobriety. If you don't stop drinking, you're not going to get sober. If you don't recognize you're kind of part of the reason that's happening, you're not going to get sober.
Right.
And we as ex-cult members have to be willing to take responsibility for our part in it, as well as how we were victimized by the guru or other cult members. We also have some responsibility for that, but that's later on. At first, you just got to deal with all the victimization and the trauma and the problems and the crap that was done to you. I think that's all stage one. Is recognizing how you were victimized and traumatized. You don't step out and go, "Oh, this was all my fault." That's not my point at all. Yeah. It's that there's a series of steps, I think, that you can kind of, or phases or whatever, however you want to put it, that you can kind of go through where you come out thinking, well, okay, I was a complete victim, to, well, actually, I kind of victimized some other people too.
Yeah.
To a more balanced look at how you got in, how you bought it, and why you kept yourself there, and how you agreed with other people keeping you there. There's a lot to it. And I mean this as adults, of course. Children are a whole different matter. I mean, children escaping from cults there's no responsibility on their part. Children are children. So, so that's what I mean. It's always individual. Each case is kind of separate,
And I hear you saying
we could talk about this for hours.
Hours, I know.
But you said you have podcasts for the last 10 years, right?
About
this topic.
I was doing. At first I called it the Sensibly Speaking podcast, which was so generic as a title. Nobody kind of twigged that it was about cults, and so now I changed my podcast this year to called Speaking of Cults. So it's very specific. I'm talking about cults. So, speaking of cults. That's right. Speaking of cults. So I think I've done 12 episodes or something so far this year, but it's so that's what my podcast has turned into, and I'm just having a blast with it. I talk to therapists and sociologists and ex-cult members, and sometimes I monologue about stuff like, one of the most common lines you hear from people who respond to stories about cults and being a cult survivor is you hear people go, well, okay, but you'd have to be a real idiot to join a cult. I mean, right? And they kind of have this attitude about it. And I addressed that in a whole episode last week. I was like, yeah, no, that's not. You guys got to stop saying that. Has nothing to do with reality. Cults don't recruit stupid people. Cults actually want smart people. And smart people are just as susceptible to emotional manipulation as stupid people. In fact, more so. So let's stop saying that, So
true.
Yeah, as soon as you make it logical, smart people are in.
Yeah,
exactly. As long as they can be made logical.
Right.
That's right. And smart people are better at imagining or creating reasons why they need to stay there. Because they reason it through better, and they rely on their intelligence, and they tell themselves they're too smart to fall for nonsense.
Only stupid people wouldn't join a cult.
Well,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny how, certain low IQ people would walk in and ask about Dianetics, and they just kind of look at us and go, oh, okay, and just walk right back out. They just, nope, they can see right through it. And smart people sometimes would come out, wow, that's so smart. That Hubbard boy, he really figured some things out. Yeah, no, he didn't. He was lying through
Yeah.
his teeth the entire time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Anyone's susceptible to that type of coercive control.
that's right. That's
So.
exactly right. And coercive control is something that anybody is susceptible to. If you can be lied to successfully, you can be controlled. It's that simple.
And people underestimate how good of liars other people are.
Well,
And I
especially
think that's a huge thing.
And if you don't think like that, you're not thinking like them. I have that conversation with people all the time. You have to think like a liar. You have to think like an abuser. You have to, otherwise you're trying to use logic and you're trying to, and it doesn't, you miss the mark every single time.
That's right.
And so
that's right.
That's hard. Yeah.
Well, we suffer from an incredible lack of emotional intelligence in our society.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in some insulting way. It's just a fact. I mean, it's just we don't foster and endorse critical thinking in education. We talk about it, we give it some degree of attention, but it needs a lot more. But it's not just good critical thinking, it's emotional intelligence welded with that, because you can be a brilliant critical thinker and critically think your way into all kinds of reasons why Scientology is completely legitimate. If you don't understand the emotional manipulation that's happening at the same time and see the red flags of emotional manipulation, if you don't even know you have emotions and that emotional manipulation is a thing, you are so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it's not like it all started when you first got in the church, though, either. Like, there was regiments that you went through, but it was nothing like when you went to Sea Org. So it's just like any abusive relationship. They don't start beating you day one. They're going to work you into it, and everything's going to seem great, because you said there was a lot of people that believed in it, but they had their homes, they had their families, they had their lives. Yep. So they can't see it from the perspective you did, because they didn't go down the rabbit hole as far. But, of course it doesn't seem that way when you first start. No. So it's even easier to be manipulated.
That's exactly right. And they front load all the love bombing at the beginning.
Right.
The best time to be in the cult is the first month or so, right? Because you feel amazing. It makes you feel, if they're doing their job as cult recruiters properly, you don't know you're being recruited and you don't know you're being manipulated, and it just feels wonderful. These are people who understand you. You found your tribe. Now somebody gets you. This kind of attitude is we hear this from ex-cult members, one to the next to the next to the next. It's the same thing, and it's because they front load all the love bombing and the emotional stuff at the beginning, and they actually use that. Here's another funny thing about cults: they use that as their selection system. People self-select for cults based on how vulnerable they are to that emotional manipulation. People who aren't vulnerable to it or don't fall for it walk right back out the door.
Yeah.
And that's most people, by the way. But if they can get you, if they can hook you somehow with some little emotional trick, right? Like for me, wanted to talk to girls. I was desperately emotionally desperate to do that. And that's how they hooked me. As stupid as that sounds, right? 27 years of total abuse and nonsense because I wanted to talk to girls.
You were a hormonal teenage boy. That's all. It was an easy button.
It was. And Scientology and groups that organize themselves around this learn through the process of evolving their recruitment techniques, like Hubbard did in the 50s and 60s. They learn the buttons. They learn what is going to appeal to people. What's the best thing to say that's going to get, 1 out of every 20 people to sign up. Yeah. And if they can get those kind of numbers, Their future is assured, right? And people don't have to stick for years. Just give us your money, let's go, right? And you have this revolving doors kind of situation. I'll tell you, like, for example, with the Sea Org, for every Sea Org member who exists right now, there are 6 ex-Sea Org members.
Wow. Yeah.
It's, like, people come in and they leave, and they come in and they go, and some stick. And to the degree that the emotional manipulation works and the thought reform techniques work, which we can go all back to Chinese re-education camps and all kinds of stuff that this stuff relies on. But it's the techniques work.
Yeah.
And that's why cults are going to be around forever. We're never not going to have them. But we can educate ourselves about ourselves so that we as individuals don't fall for obvious red flags, obvious issues or problems. We can always do better. And I think we can do better in the direction of understanding ourselves better and what makes us tick better. If I had understood emotional needs and my vulnerability when I was 17, I would not have fallen for what they fed me,
Yeah.
But I didn't have a clue about any of that. And that's how they got me.
Yeah. Where can people find you? Do we have your links for people who want to learn more about, what you have to offer, work with you, be a part of your speaking engagements? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's where I put most of my work.
Okay.
I have a website, mncriticalthinking.com. I'll send you guys the links. These guys,
okay, good.
I'll send you the links to these things. But basically, I have my YouTube channel and I have my website, and then I have written this book, by the way. Here.
Oh, let's see it. Scientology.
This is my book on Scientology. This is not my memoir. This book is an actual critical analysis of Scientology.
Nice.
I break it all down. Yeah.
Okay.
Xenu and the beliefs and the abuses and why do they have tax exemption and who was L. Ron Hubbard. It's all in here. So you can get that book on Amazon.
Yeah. Congrats on writing that book.
I do have the website and the YouTube links. So those will definitely be in the description. And then is your book listed on your website? Can they get to it?
Absolutely.
Okay. Perfect.
Yep. Links to all of this stuff in every video I put out. So you've got that. If you go to my YouTube channel, you'll get all my links.
All right.
Awesome. Well, it has been so interesting talking to you.
Thank you so much. I know, like Desiree said, I think we could go on for hours, but this is a topic
that tends to drag out. There's a lot to know about Scientology. It's fun stuff. So
and at some time maybe we could have you back and you could talk about the other cults that have been parallel. So that would be fun to do. But
love to do that.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you.